Hi, and welcome to Take Every Thought Captive, a weekly look at the Catholic intellectual tradition and an exploration of the authors, books, and topics that have shaped Catholic thinking for 2,000 years. My name is Jason Gale, and I'm joined this week with Dr. Benjamin Smith, our lecturer in philosophy here at Catholic Studies Academy. And today we are going to be covering the topic of Christian apologetics. But before we get started today, I want to invite y'all to please share the content that we put out there for the building up of our Catholic faiths. And please hit that like button, subscribe. This helps us out and helps grow the community in the digital realm, in the metaverse. One day we'll be in the metaverse.
I don't know if are we in the metaverse? I don't know.
All right. So our topic today is going to be looking at apologetics. So we want to kind of explore evidence for the Christian faith, and many times today, before we're even given the opportunity to present a case for the Christian faith, we're presented with just multiple challenges. And as Catholics, we have to be equipped to handle specific topics that we're dealing with today. Some of them are new, some of them are old and recycled.
Sure.
But it's important for the Christian to be able to do that and to if you were going to teach a class or if you were going to give a presentation, one of the things you want to do is try to anticipate some of the questions that may be asked of you. So as Catholics, this is what we want to be able to do, is to look at the world with a good, keen eye, recognize the challenges to Christianity that's out there, and be able to provide some sort of defense or answer against those challenges, but then on the flip side of it, build it back up. So the way that Dr. Smith and I like to talk about it is sometimes we have to deconstruct maybe somebody's erroneous view of Christianity or Catholicism, but that's not good enough. We have to help build it back up into something positive. Yeah. So Dr. Smith, to get us started, let's begin with kind of maybe the deconstruction side of it. What are some of the challenges that we're dealing with today? Sure.
Yeah. We might call it the deconstruction is kind of a loaded word these days, right? So we have to be careful with that. But maybe the straightforwardly defensive part of it, because there are just attacks, right? And we just have to be prepared for that. One of the things, Christians are naive if we don't think that we're caught in a spiritual warfare or warfare that's for the mind. The New Testament's very clear on this, right? We skip these passages, nowadays, but the Christian faith Christian life is often depicted as a battle, right? Military metaphors are used throughout Scripture, right, to describe Christian life, and so we need to be ready for that battle. We need to be equipped. Even the title of this podcast, right, is taking every thought captive, right? That comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 10. I'm just going to read here from a little bit more of that passage that starts at, we could say, verse 4. It says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ." I mean, I think that's a pretty powerful witness to the importance of apologetics. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah. I mean, even the Bible's compared to a weapon, right? The Bible is a sword.
That's right. Yeah.
So it is this weird thing in Christianity where sometimes maybe it's just a point of emphasis, but we sit here and we say, just the over focus on mercy and gentleness and all this. You throw up the analogy of, the Bible's a sword. Whoa.
That's right. Yeah. I would ask, the person who, doesn't like, this sort of thing. You just say, look, or the person who, maybe what's ignored says, well, when was the last time you destroyed an argument? When was the last time you tore down a stronghold? Right? Like that's something that we need to be equipped to do, right? As Christians. And again, if that's true in general of the Christian faith, that it involves a kind of a military combative side, right? It's true, especially today, where we live in a society that is so post-Christian. Let me tell you what, especially for parents, if you're sending your kids out into, to college, into their mid-20s, without equipping them at least a little bit,
Yeah.
they're lambs to the slaughter. I hate to put it that way,
Yeah.
but it's just that bad. All right. So many of our institutions are hostile to Christian faith. Obviously, the media is hostile to Christian faith. My cousin, I won't give her name, but she teaches. She's a longtime, high school teacher. She calls cell phones a gateway to hell, right? Because she sees it, like what happens when people, these teenagers, right? They're exposed to so much in social media, right? So much that's anti-Christian, that's secular, that's just really debased and in a lot of ways, sort of, I don't know, kind of diabolical, right? So, we need to be equipped. We need to have our kids be equipped to face what are the direct challenges. So as you said, Jason, right, there's a defensive side part of this, and then there's a constructive side of it, or destructive and constructive. So let's think about the destructive first, because this is where you're going to get challenges, right, directly to try to undermine Christian faith, right?
Yeah.
And probably one of them that, so many people are aware of is relativism, right?
Sure.
Christianity makes a claim to be true, right? Is that correct, Jason?
Period.
That's
Full
right,
stop.
right.
Full stop.
Yeah, I mean, why be a Christian? If somebody says, "Why are you a Christian?" I think this is so aggravating, right? So we got to say, back up here just a little bit and say, first, apologetics is important because truth is important, all right? And the truth value of Christianity is important. If all you've got to say with respect to why you believe is because of some experience, right? Mm-hmm. Or because of your feelings, well, that's just not good enough, right? Because other people have other feelings, right? That doesn't explain anything, right? In terms of why Christianity is true, right? And it's important that it is true. When somebody asks you why are you a Christian, you should say because Christianity is reality.
Yeah, well, and that's and that's something that can easily be put to the relativists. If truth is that which is in accord with reality, and what you're saying is not true, that would make it what? Fantasy.
Yeah, or something
else. Yeah. What and to ask the question, what do you want to live by?
That's right.
Your imagination or
your feelings,
your fleeting feelings.
Yeah, that's right.
Or do you want something a little bit stronger, something that is reality itself?
Right.
And that's and even I think that kind of perspective, as much as sometimes we talk about like the Christian worldview or something like that, it's not that we're putting on these Christian glasses to look at reality. Right. It's that we have the ability to see reality as it is and saying, I have no say in this, in being, I have no say.
Right. It just is, right?
It just is. Yeah.
Yeah. So because Christianity, I mean, look here's the thing. And I mean, I'm sure that those listening to us know this, but it's worth enforcing. Christianity is not worth following because of the way it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Right. It's only worth following because drugs can give you a good feeling. Alcohol can give you a good feeling, all sorts of things. You meditate, strange forms of meditation or new age practices can give you a good feeling. Right. Right. That's not the important reason to follow Christianity. Right.
Yeah.
There's one reason, and as weird as it sounds, don't follow Christianity because it'll give you a better marriage. Right. That's not the reason to follow Christianity either. Hopefully it will give you a better marriage, right? But that's not the reason to follow it. The only reason to follow Christianity is if it's true, right? If you have any other reason for being a Christian, that's not sufficient, right? You only follow Christianity if it's true. Now,
I mean, the same with science, right? Why would you follow science that's not true?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's going to be those challenges to the truth of Christianity, right? So if I say, well, why are you a Christian? And my response is, well, because it's reality, hopefully you'll say it that strongly. Okay. And I just don't say it's true for me or anything like that. Right. Just say, because it's reality. Right.
Yeah.
Then you're going to get the challenge. Right. And it might be a strong challenge, especially if you state it that strongly. the one immediate response is going to be, well, that's just true for you, right? Something like that. Now, there's a lot that's kind of packed into that, right? As an perspective of philosophy, that's epistemologically called relativism, right? and there's different ways of stating it, but the basic idea, right, is that truth is relative to the individual or culture or historical period, right?
Yeah.
Now, that presupposes, right, that there isn't a real truth, or that we can't get to the truth, right?
Yeah.
So we end up saying, well, truth is relative, right? Because obviously, if God does really exist and we could know that, then the truth wouldn't be relative, right? It would be based on the reality that God exists and that we know it, right?
Yeah.
So it presupposes, right, a certain kind of at least agnosticism about certain issues, right? Now, as a general, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I think that's important to point out there for our listeners is you put it in there when you're talking about relativism that there are some different types. You may not encounter the crazy relativist that just absolutely thinks everything is relative. But there is a popular form of relativism that just says, well, this is kind of how our culture and our society has constructed our version of what we call reality. So and it can be otherwise in other cultures,
Sure.
or as our society evolves, we, the new generation, have the ability to construct this as we see fit. So it's not a complete form of or like a crazy form of relativism, but it's a form of kind of cultural or a society says kind of relativism.
Right. Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, and basically, if you're playing that out, if you're developing that, right, it's the idea that, well, we have different perspectives at different times, right?
Yeah.
And so, because of that, right, truth is relative to your epoch, right, or your time. Another way to put it is just to think about, everybody has their own perspective. This is probably the most common. Everybody has their own perspective and experience, right? And because everybody has their own perspective and experience, you don't have my experience, right, Jason?
Yeah. Nope.
I mean, you haven't been Benjamin Smith, right?
Nope.
That's probably a good thing. You haven't felt the things that Benjamin Smith has felt. You haven't seen the things that Benjamin Smith has seen.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them, but not others. Therefore, right, our truth can't be the same.
Yeah.
Right. Because, truth at the end of the day, your access to truth is just based on your experience. You got your experience, I've got mine. There's no way, right? So there's going to be your truth and my truth, but there's not the truth, right?
Yeah.
Because our experiences and perspectives aren't the same. I think that's probably the most common that I run into.
Yeah.
Does that sound right to you, Jason?
Yeah. And sadly it is. And it's also, probably the most least thought out position. I mean, some of the other forms of relativism are more well thought out and stuff, but yeah.
Right. So truth is relative because experience is subjective and individual, to put it in an ancient philosophy way, appearances are relative and therefore truth is relative, right?
Yeah.
Truth at its best is what it appears to be, right?
Yeah.
And since what appears to be is different for different people, right? Truth is going to be relative to different people, right?
Yeah. And a lot of that also goes back to, and this would be another episode, I think, is, and especially within Catholicism, there was a doing away with metaphysics and a replacement of metaphysics with psychology and sociology. Right. So faith becomes the way that you look at the world, fashioned by your experiences of reality or something like that. It's just it's I don't want to say it's completely like, a Freudian approach, but it does away with, real existence. Again, like you said, it's, your experience is what is reality, not the thing experienced.
Right. Yeah. So let's frame this in specifically Christian or anti-Christian terms, right? So you say, Christianity is truth, right? Christianity is reality, right? And the relativist response is going to be, well, that's true for you because of your experiences,
Yeah.
It's not true for me because of my experiences, right? So even though you've had some experiences that makes that true for you, it doesn't have any epistemological hold on me. And most importantly, no metaphysical or ethical demands that would follow from the truth of Christianity, right? So you can take your Christianity, coming from the backwoods of Texas like you are, and and go away because we're sophisticated people from East Nashville, and we don't have to have, we don't have your experience, right, of needing a savior. That's your own, weirdness, right? That kind of thing you're gonna say is, there's a lot again that's there psychologically, sociologically, at its root, though, philosophically, right? It's an absurdity, right? Because if you say, okay, so what you do here, right, is I say, well, that's true for you. The thing that you need to say back to me is what, Jason? Are you saying that truth is relative?
Yeah.
Right. That's the question. And one of the things that I hope that comes out of this conversation is this practical point. If you get involved in an apologetics conversation or debate, one of the number one things you need to do is ask questions. Okay.
Yeah.
More than even like make claims, ask questions, right? If somebody says, well, that's just true for you, you could say, well, do you think that like everything's like that? Like, just, what do you mean true for me? Like, it's relative. And then you could say, yeah, it's relative to you. And then you ask, do you think truth is relative?
Yeah.
Right?
Is God real? He either isn't or he is. He can't be both.
Both, right?
It's, and I think you're 100% right about asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, somebody's, with as much conviction as we want you to be able to say, I believe in Christianity because it is real, because it is reality.
Mm-hmm.
You will encounter people with the same amount of conviction about their own relativism.
Sure.
And so, one of the first things is maybe just, pointing out the weak spot in that kind of thinking,
mm-hmm.
And getting them to really examine it on, let's play this out. Let's carry this to its logical conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think getting straight to that point is important.
Mm-hmm.
Is truth relative then?
There you go. Yeah.
Getting straight to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There you're introducing a philosophical question, right? You're pushing them.
Yeah.
Right. And you're going to reveal, right, the foolishness behind their position. Right. And when I say foolishness, that's not to insult the person. Right.
Right.
Their intellect is clouded by the ignorance that follows from original sin. Right. And so, as scripture says itself, right, it's the fool who says in his heart, there is no God. Right. Again, we're not trying to insult our interlocutor, but there is a kind of foolishness in denying the existence of God. And so what you want to say here is, okay, now let's get to the philosophical question. So you think all truth claims are relative, right? You think truth is relative, right? Or that there are no absolute truths, right? If you ask them that, right? Are you saying there are no absolute truths? And if they say there are no absolute truths, you should say, no, wait a second.
That sounds like an absolute.
That sounds like an absolute. Seems like you just contradicted yourself, my friend. Have you really thought this through? Right. Now, at that point, you've won the debate. Right. Yeah. You've shown that their position. You've won the debate about whether or not relativism is sufficient defense against Christian faith or sufficient criticism. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if truth is, you kind of can play it out a little bit and say, look, the claim that all of truth is relative is self-defeating. It's irrational. You can't believe that. Mm-hmm. So if that's irrational, why is it that religious belief in particular is relative? Right. But truth in general is not relative. Right. Now they might say, well, religion is just based on feelings, and say, well, how do you know that? Right. Yeah. What is that like?
That's not a statement of feeling. Right. You're making a statement of fact about religion.
That's right. Is that relative or is it not? Right. Yeah. If it's absolute, how do you know it's absolute? Right. And if at the end of the day, what's here is this is just their unbelief showing, right? They don't believe there's a God. So there's no way for faith to be based on reality. right? Or faith to be a response to reality, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing: is that's just circular, then, right? You know, you can't know that God exists because there is no God. Well, that's just begging the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a helpful to think through that, right?
Sure.
Again, that once that's just true for you, leads to, or is logically closely connected to the claim that there are no absolute truths, which is a contradiction, right? Did you want to add anything to that, Jason? Or
no, that's I think that's a good explanation. And again, if you can get your interlocutor to that point, you've done a lot.
That's right.
And it won't be as quick as we just went through it. If it is, that's
sure.
awesome. You're amazing. But to again to get the other person to really think this through, to sit there and even if they end it, I mean, I remember one time having a conversation, where the guy was like, I completely disagree with you, but I think your position is reasonable. And I was like, okay, that's good enough. That's good enough, because it's at least, consistent, and that's, and that's a first step to somebody being open to God's grace and to being open to conversion, whether they call it that or not, So we're gonna be some of the other challenges that we encounter. So relativism, what else?
Another one's going to be pluralism, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is one you might even encounter among other Christians. This is one of the things that I think in general apologetics you have to be aware of. Are Christians who are deceived, Christians who have been misled, right? So pluralism would be the view, maybe not that truth is relative, although it's very closely related, but that there are many truths, right?
Yeah.
And so, we want to be inclusive, right, today, right? Apparently. And so what in religious context, this comes down to, well, again, it's very close to relativism, but that every religion is true.
Yeah. Right? There's God is too big for there to be only one pathway. There's many paths to the one big God. There's many small paths, however they decide to
don't put God in a box,
Yeah. Or churches just add, man-made inventions to, they attach it on, things like that. So,
yeah. So there's many paths, all that sort of thing. Right. Well, here's the thing. Look, that again, say, okay. So what you want to say there is, it's not, what you're describing is not possible, because these paths don't all lead to the same goal, because they're mutually exclusive. They cannot all be true, right?
Yeah.
And your interlocutor might be, well, why is that the case? That sounds awfully exclusive and narrow-minded. Well, because of the very things that those religions profess, right?
Yeah.
Like reincarnation cannot both be true and not true.
Yeah.
Right? It either is or it is not. Right? That's logic, right? That's the principle of non-contradiction, right? You can't, Christianity denies reincarnation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Other religions, Hinduism in particular, profess reincarnation. Can't both be true. Like, what do you want to say, right? I mean, it's X and not X, right? In different way, Islam denies the divinity of Jesus Christ. Christianity professes the divinity of Jesus Christ. These
and that Jesus
both be
Christ,
true.
And that Jesus Christ is the only way to God the Father.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
There's, and I like the way kind of the because somebody can ask that question, and I've been asked that question before too, and it's hard to know where to go. Like, okay, do I get into a study of comparative religions? Do I get into, how do I do this? But I think the way that you present it there with, begin with the end. What do maybe what do some of these religions, what do they have in mind for the end of man, right? Because that quickly gets to what's at the heart of that religion.
That's right. Right.
So before you get into, maybe some other, other beliefs and whatever, begin with the end. I think that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that it's helpful. But we also need to I think expand this. Again, you're not trying to be hostile here. You're not trying to make your interlocutor feel stupid, but you just say, look, this is irrational. Now you could, here's a soft sell or a softer approach, which is to say, I think what you're trying to say is that every religion contains some truth.
Yeah.
You could say that, right? That's okay, right? There are in Islam, there are things that are taught that are true, right? And that's good, right?
Sure.
Islam, teaches that theft is evil, right? And that it's contrary to God's will, and that's true, right? It's immoral to be a thief. And so we can recognize that there are some truths, right, in any religion. That's different than saying that all religions are true, right? Right.
Yeah.
Because they aren't. This needs to be expanded in our own time, Jason. Something I've just become more aware of in the last decade, and this is something we maybe ought to address more. But this needs to expand it to also things like neo-paganism, right?
Yeah.
To Wicca. To New
or
Age
Norse
beliefs,
or even now, there's like a huge resurgence in Norse mythology and religion, and I don't know if it's just because of Viking shows or what, but for whatever reason, there's entire YouTube channels dedicated to the Norse religion. Paganism.
Again, who wants to resurrect that stuff? I mean, good grief. But look, you cannot worship Odin and Jesus, right? That doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Norse, paganism is, not compatible, right? It's contrary to Christianity. So is Wicca, right? So are any kinds of magic, right? The scripture says, that God detests, right, those sorts of things, right? And that's also true of the New Age, which is, very amorphous, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, the key ideas of the New Age are basically pantheism and monism, right? Yeah. Those are really, when you get down to it, that's what New Age, at a metaphysical level, right? That's what New Age professes. Everything is one and everything is divine, and you need to release the divine within you. That's the New Age. There's a lot of different ways to package it. There's a lot of different ways to make money off of it, selling crystals and things like that. But that's the essence of the matter. And of course, Christianity denies that that's true, denies that everything is one, and denies that everything is divine, right? So these things are pluralism. It sounds, I think it's attractive because it makes it I can have my Christianity and these other religions, we can say, oh, they're good too, and all that. But at the end of the day, even if you recognize that maybe there is something good or true within another religion, you can't say that religion is true, right? That it's the true description of reality.
Well, right? Because
exclusive with Christianity.
And I think the reason why I think it's popular is because it's reflective of the current societal virtues of inclusivity and even kind of it's very non-confrontational, right?
That's right.
I don't want to say you're dumb for worshiping, the tree, but you're worshiping a tree,
that's right. Yeah.
So I mean, I think it holds up, and it creates this kind of just this false peace, this false you would never let again, you think about your own kids or something like that, you would never let them live I say this recognizing that our world does this all the time, but I would never let my children, live according to a falsehood and say, well, I don't want to really impose. No, if you're going to stick a fork in a socket, I'm going to smack it out of your hand, right? Because it's not good for you, right?
If little Johnny thinks he can fly, he's wrong, and I'm gonna disabuse him of that error before he tries to fly off the top of the roof.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I mean, if you're it's actually uncharitable to let to let somebody live in a falsehood.
That's right.
Um, and this can be applied to even, smaller ones, not just, religious ones, but I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
the whole gender thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a form of abuse,
Sure.
period. So there's, we wouldn't just say, well, that's okay. We can all get along or something like that. No. And the thing is there's things within, like you said, those religions that are contradictory. And
yes,
they can't just, we can't just gloss over them because they're pretty big.
That's right.
That's like
right. Yeah.
Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. That's
right.
Yeah, not a.
That's right. It's right. Yeah. I mean, Scripture's full of that kind of exclusivity of Jesus Christ, for sure. So that's another one to be aware of. And notice, our listeners notice this. Really, this is just logic. This is just the two things we used so far. And it's not like super sophisticated. You don't have to be a scripture scholar or steeped in patristics, okay, or something like that, to be able to show why relativism is irrational, and to show why pluralism is irrational, right? Mm-hmm. Those are just pretty straightforward, common sense reasoning, right? Should expose those as errors, right? That's why Scripture is true, right? That there's a kind of foolishness, right, and darkness, right, that's involved in this. It's I mean, at the end of the day, it's the rebel heart, right? We should know that, right? That we deny God, right, because we don't want there to be God, right? But in any event, so the next one, right, challenge here that you're likely to run into is scientism. Okay, now scientism is not the same as science, right? And we've emphasized that often in this podcast. Science is an excellent method for inquiring into various questions and subject matter. Inquiring into questions about anatomy, physical forces, those sorts of things. And that's what science is set up to do. And it's a great method of inquiry for doing those things, right?
Right.
Scientism is a philosophical theory, right, about science and truth, right? It's different than the scientific method. Scientism is, technically speaking, an epistemological theory, right? So just to spell this out, our longtime listeners probably have a pretty good idea of what that means, but epistemology, right, is a philosophical theory of knowledge, right?
So how do you know something? That's the question it's scaring to get at.
That's right. How do you know what's truth? What is knowledge? How do you get it, right?
Yeah.
And we all have an epistemology implicitly. We may have not thought about it explicitly, but we all have one. Scientism is a little more explicit, right? And basically it comes down to the claim that only those propositions are objectively true that are demonstrated by science, right? Or demonstrated scientifically. You could put it a couple different ways. Only those judgments are true which are demonstrated by science, or objectively true. That kind of thing, right? And we've talked about this a good deal, both in our Modern Mind episode, which was a while back, or a more recent episode on the crisis of philosophy. But there's a real tendency in modern discourse to sort of sequester the objective, right, into math and science, and then everything else is subjective, right? So you want to challenge that, right? Because science doesn't prove the existence of God or the truth of Christianity. I know there are some Christian apologists out there who kind of take that approach. I always think that that's not really that helpful or even really necessary, right? Because what you could really argue instead is just that, use philosophy, right? You don't need to try to bend the scientific method to proving something that it's not set up to prove. The scientific method can only deal with things that are measurable and observable, right? Well, we can't directly observe the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We can't directly observe his divinity. We can't, we could maybe reason to the idea that such and such is the best possible explanation, right?
Sure.
but that's a philosophical type argument. That's not and to me, in saying that, that's totally fine, right? Because you know what, I don't accept scientism, right? I think that we can know things and that we can have truth, we can access the truth in ways other than modern science.
Yeah. Two things I'd say about this is, first, the claim itself that scientism makes is not and cannot be proven using the scientific method or is observable. So you're going to make a very truth fact statement about all of reality that does not, that cannot be proven by its own claim. So we would call that we call that a self-defeating argument kind of a deal. Right. So that's problematic, and the other thing, I think it's just a practical kind of a practical aspect to scientism that we've experienced in recent time, and that's just the subjugation, or I don't know what the right word is, where you subject everything, all of life, to what is demonstrable to from the scientific method or something like that. You put science in a place that it's never been or never made the claim to be. Sure. And practically that it's not good for the human person, because we're not simply material. We're not simply things like that. So, when you for the material world, it's pretty helpful, pretty dang helpful.
I mean, like the microphones that we're using and the eyeglasses on my face. I mean, those are all great things, right? All this technology that we're using to have the podcast, right, is, those are, the results of science. And so there's no question of putting science down here, right? It's just a recognition that if you try to make science the ultimate and exclusive criteria of truth, right? Then you end up in a self-defeating position, right? And when this is brought forward as a block to Christianity, right, into Christian faith, you can't prove Christianity by science, therefore Christianity is not real. Well, you're presupposing, right, that, as you said, Jason, that only those things are real that can be proven by science, right? But science itself can't prove that, therefore it's self-defeating, right? I would also want to point out, if you wanted to take it more deeply, right, that there are presuppositions to the reliability of science that science can't demonstrate without begging the question, right? Namely the reliability of observation, the uniformity of nature, right? Right, the reliability of logic. All of those things are presupposed within the scientific method, right? And so, that's why it at least has to be open to philosophy, right? If nothing else, right? But it cannot be used rationally as a block to Christian faith. And I think that's the key point, is that again, the claim can't prove that what it's trying to do, right? Saying that Christianity is wrong because it can't be. Well, and there's so many things, just I think I don't want to say easy arguments, but I think things that demonstrate kind of the falsehood of a scientific position like this, or scientism position like this. How do you how do you measure love? How do you measure hope? Are those things not real then? How do you measure the soul? How do you identify the soul? How do you, there's so many things, so you either have to completely deny these things, which then reduce the human person to something they're not, or to simply their material. Thus, you have to do away with so much that that has to do with just your common experience, so and the laboratory of life, right? That's right. That's great. Yeah.
It's going to, scientism is going to leave off some of the most fundamental aspects of human life that I think it quickly falls apart.
Sure.
And just,
and the truth is, you don't live this way. right? In most instances, right? I mean, like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I haven't scientifically proven that, you know, my car is going to start. And so, you know, like, no, like we live our lives in without recourse to scientism normally.
Right.
And you do need to be careful as a Christian, right? Not to get baited, right? That's one thing I want to point out here. Somebody says something like, well, look, I mean, science proves that the resurrection didn't happen, or challenges you and says, well, yeah, I mean, there's no scientific evidence that the resurrection didn't happen, right? Or that the resurrection happened, excuse me. Well, again, don't be baited right there, right? Stop, think for a minute and say, I agree that that the resurrection isn't scientifically demonstrable, right?
Yeah.
I don't agree that it necessarily follows that it's false, right?
Yeah. Those are two different claims.
And then ask the question, are you saying that only those things that are scientifically demonstrated are real, right?
Yeah.
That ask them that question, right?
Yeah.
And then you're putting us back in the philosophical, right? Discussion, and you can show here, right, that is a self-defeating premise, right? Or self-defeating hypothesis.
I encountered when I was a DRE, there was a fairly intelligent 8th grader who was like, I don't want to be confirmed because I'm a man of science, you know, and he just completely went by this, you know, I don't believe in, you know, I think faith is not reliable like science is, and you know, it just kind of taking this position. And I said, you know, and a lot of it goes back to you know, the epistemological question of you know, how do you know, right? You know, and so he's like, well, it must be demonstrated by science, yada yada yada, and I'm like, oh, okay, you know, well, what have you read? And he named all these books, and I said, well, how? I said, do you have direct experience of what they're saying, or are you taking are you taking their word for it? I said, that's a form of kind of natural faith, when you believe what somebody is saying based on them saying it.
Right.
I said,
right.
And you know, and so, you know, philosophically, you know, there are natural forms of faith, right? That you know, that otherwise life would be completely unlivable. Even,
of course, yeah.
You know, Cardinal Ratzinger makes this point that you don't have to have direct knowledge of everything in order to go through life. Life would be unlivable. You know, like I don't know how my gas pedal works, therefore I'm not going to use it until I have direct knowledge on how my gas pedal works.
Yeah.
No, you would never get anywhere. Right?
That's right.
So, you know, naturally speaking, or practically speaking, you have to take some people at their words. You have to you can't put up the shield of science to every single claim, because life would be completely just unlivable, unenjoyable. And you know, how do I know this beer isn't poison? You know, like
so, right, and that just shows you, right, that this criteria, not only is it irrational, right, it's unworkable, but also it's just being brought up it's brought in inconsistently, right? It's brought in as specifically something to shut down Christian faith, right? But I agree with you. Please don't take the bait. Think through it and get back to the epistemological question that's right,
that it's based on. You know?
Get back to the philosophical presupposition, and then you'll be in better shape, right? Probably, you know, the fourth, and we can, you know, wrap up with this one, the fourth, and I would say maybe today most important criticism or attack you're going to experience on Christian faith. It's really interesting. This was not the case, I think, when I was younger, but is that Christianity is immoral, or that it's unethical, right, to be a Christian, right? That there's something unjust, right, and discriminatory about Christianity, right? So that really Christianity, you should be ashamed of being a Christian, right? Because Christianity is an immoral religion. Have you noticed that the growth in that kind of criticism? I think it's really, and you know, quite frighteningly, I don't know, it's frightening that it's you know, you hear these claims more and more of, you know,
Christians being bigots or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, or being not inviting, exclusive,
Right,
and
right,
and
right,
again
right.
violating every and this is where the world and Christianity are really starting to butt heads. Is the things that Christianity actually claims is really striking at the heart of our current virtues that
Right.
we try to hold up as a society.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
there, and so Christianity is being really, in some cases, very openly, and I think for the first time, like you said, it's kind of a new phenomena thing, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
where we're seeing people push back against Christianity as Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
not and we've always seen Christianity being pushed back as pointing to this Christian or that Christian,
Mm-hmm.
right, against the people. That's always been the case, and that'll never stop being the case.
Sure.
But I think recently, right,
Mm-hmm.
Christianity is being pointed to as something that's homophobic, that's
Mm-hmm.
xenophobic, or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
as Christianity, not just
Yeah.
Christians.
Yeah. So I think the distinction you're making there is are there bad Christians? Yes, right.
Yeah,
That's always been true, right? It always will be true. But then where there's an ethical critique of Christianity in itself, right?
yeah,
And this is really interesting, and I think it's an effect of it grows out of what I would call the new morality. And
mhm,
it's interesting, Jason, that relativism still is widespread, but it goes hand in hand. And I've experienced this in my students. Relativism, except about the new morality, right? There is like a new morality, right?
yeah,
And it's been growing. And I remember telling, conservative Christian friends, even a decade ago, that I don't think relativism is the biggest thing anymore. I think
yeah,
what's really threatening is a new kind of moral realism, right? Just because relativism is false doesn't mean that every version of moral realism is true, right? You see what I'm
right,
saying? You
right,
can have false moral claims, right? So what am I saying right here by this new morality? We've talked about this in depth. I don't want to do that right now, but if you want the full historical account, right, you
mhm,
could look at our episodes on our episode on Neo-Marxism, right? We did an
yeah,
episode on that, right, Jason?
yeah,
Yeah. So you just kind of go in and look up Neo-Marxism in on our YouTube channel, and you should be able to find it. But it's that's the background. That's essentially what the new morality is Neo-Marxism, which means you need to know a little bit about Marxism. Again, we've got long episodes on this that'll give you lots of details. And I really urge you to go and do the work of
yeah,
listening to those episodes, because they're really very informative, right? But in fact, I have a couple friends who listen to us regularly, and they in particular point out those episodes as being some of our better ones, right? In terms of just the information they got was,
yeah,
kind of really helpful to them. So essentially, Marxism there's a lot of things about Marxism. It's interesting, complex view, but
yeah,
the essential point that's important for us today is the view that history is fundamentally about an oppressor-oppressed dialectic, right?
yeah,
The word dialectic in Marxism means opposition,
yeah,
right? So that fundamentally, human society, the human condition, is one of competition, opposition between an oppressor class and an oppressed.
yeah,
Originally, Marxism described this in terms of the capitalist versus the proletariat, right?
yeah,
The exploited worker versus the exploiting capitalist, right? Subsequently, that's been expanded, right, to other categories of oppressor and oppressed, right?
mhm,
So the heteronormative versus the homosexual, men oppressing women. You can even say parents oppressing children,
yeah,
white culture oppressing non-white culture, Western societies oppressing non-Western societies, etc.
yeah,
Right? Now, that oppression is spelled out in terms of, obvious things that, and, that I think anybody would agree to without being a Marxist, right? Acts of violence, theft, kidnapping, etc. But it's the essential critique is one of inequality and discrimination, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is being treated with in a discriminatory way, such that you are not given an equal opportunity, an equal condition, such that you're disadvantaged relative to the oppressor class, right? So what's fundamentally wrong, right, with male sexism in this view, right, is that what's fundamentally wrong is it involves the discriminatory treatment of women, that is the unequal treatment of women, such that women are exploited, right? Their energy, their creativity, their labor is exploited to the advantage, the unequal advantage and unfair advantage of the male, right? Does that, you've heard that sort of critique before.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll point out that I think is important for our listeners to grasp, that makes neo-Marxism or Marxism so frightening and a real danger to society, is that it's not just an economic philosophy, because many times it gets boiled down to economics. But that's not what Marx had in mind. Marx, he had it was a philosophy about reality, about, the
about
world. How
nature.
How does the world work? What is, the human nature, right? It is, and society is, operates on this, this dialectic, like you said. And so, while it's not just, an epistemological theory and economic, it's everything. It covers it. It really tries to cover everything. And but the way you encounter it is not going to be, so I'm a Marxist and here's my position.
Right.
You're
most people, most people influenced by Marxism or neo-Marxism don't know it. They would, if you ask them, "Are you a commie?" They would probably say no, right? Are you a communist? Well, no, right?
So they come at it through these different avenues and strategies. And one of the, like you said, one of the main strategies of the neo-Marxists is going to be framing the world and its existence in this main way of the oppressed and the oppressor, that there's these two classes, right? Whatever classes they may be, however they want to describe them,
right.
Like that's the, the first thing that the apologist, I think, has to do is to recognize kind of what's underneath this, what's the premise to this view of reality.
Very good.
Right.
Again, get it back to the philosophical presupposition. So here, like, we have talked about this, as I say, in great detail philosophically in other episodes. Here, I want to just sort of focus in on the apologetic context. And say, okay, how does this critique? Because, you might be saying, well, isn't that kind of true? And I think one of the things you want to say is, it is kind of true, right? That is, there is some truth to this. Obviously, Western society has done things that it should not have done to non-Western societies, right? Western civilization, right? The question is that the fundamental picture of reality, right? Is that is that the only story or the only truth that's important about Western civilization? And of course, I'd say no. Now, but importantly here, let's look at this in the apologetic context. Marxism, or this kind of neo-Marxist critique, is leveled against Christianity, right? As being Western, imperialistic, racist, homophobic,
exploitative, like you said.
Capitalist, exploitative, economically, all of that, right? All of the, like, Christianity is evil because it oppresses women, it oppresses homosexuals, it oppresses non-Western civilizations, it oppresses non-Christian religions, etc. Okay, that's the critique, right? And you're bad, right, for being Christian, right? So that's, I think that's really where it is. Now, from an apologetics perspective, I think the main thing you want to push back on. So there's two possible lines of argument you could make here, right? One is, no, Christianity is not really patriarchal, right?
Yeah.
Or that sort of thing. So you could try to like deal with it. This is what I'd call kind of an inductive particular issue kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a bad approach, but it's really complicated, actually, right? And you really need to know a lot about history, right?
Theology, philosophy.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
you gotta know a lot about.
You're gonna have to really know your chops here, right?
Yeah.
Because the truth is, right? Say with men and women, Christianity isn't compatible with egalitarian feminism, right? In its most radical forms, right? And if your standard is egalitarian feminism, like a radical version of feminism, then I'm going to have to say, yeah, you're right. We disagree. You know, at the same time, I'm going to want to insist that abusive forms of exploitation are also contrary. You know, abuse and exploitation is also contrary to Christianity, right? But then you have to sort of develop a real model that makes it possible to explain all those things. So I actually don't recommend going down that path. Okay.
Yeah.
To most people in most circumstances. I do recommend acknowledging that Christians have been racist. There are Christians who have been racist, and we're sad, and we regret that that's true, right? There have been Christian men who have been abusive, and we regret that that's true, right? And we want to avoid those. So I think that's a good thing. But then you would say, but I don't think that's the whole of Christianity.
Yeah.
I don't think
there's
the
nothing
most important story about Christianity, right? The Christian story, I'd put it this way: the Christian story is bigger than the failures of particular Christians.
Right. Or to say, while some Christians, have been X, Y, or Z, there's nothing in Christianity that supports them for being X, Y, or Z. Like there's nothing, there's not, some ninth beatitude or something like that says, husbands, or Ephesians, 9 or whatever is talking about, how husbands need to beat their wives. Like there's
not there.
It's
not there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not there. And that a lot of it is not, they're that way not because of their religion.
Right.
It's
and what you point
out
out is there are others who aren't Christians who do these bad things, right? So it's not sort of inherent, right?
Right, and that's a good way to point to, like, this is not A is not the cause of B.
That's right. Yeah. But I think I would tread softly there, right?
Yeah.
I would just kind of put that out there because, again, you can easily get drugged back into
particular issues.
Yeah, particular issues that get really complicated. So the main thrust I would push is, well, what is your basis, right, for saying that unequal treatment is wrong? Right? Like what? Like you're saying that? I mean, the fundamental issue here is inequality, right?
Yeah.
What's wrong with inequality, right? What's your basis for saying inequality is wrong?
It's not fair. It's not fair. It's it's not fair. It usually leads to the marginalization of the underclass of the, and that's why we have the oppressed class, whatever the oppressed class may be.
Sure.
Right.
And then you ask, like, what's wrong with that?
Well, it's just not fair. I mean, I think people get
it
caught
just
up.
Becomes circular, right?
Yeah.
You're just saying it's bad because it's not fair, and you shouldn't be unfair because that would be unfair, right? Right? Which is circular, right? I mean, the truth is, most secular ethicists, don't have any ground to stand on, right?
Yeah,
they don't have any foundation for a way to philosophically defend their position, right?
So they would ask you. They would say, okay, Dr. Smith, why? So you're saying inequality is a good thing, or that we should discriminate?
I would say two things. One, some kinds of inequality are wrong, right?
Yeah.
And some kinds of discrimination are wrong. And I have a foundation. I have, as a Christian and, as a philosopher, have a foundation for saying why that's the case. And secondly, I also have principles that allow me to rationally distinguish between acceptable discrimination and unacceptable discrimination, right?
Yeah.
Now that does get you gets pretty philosophically heavy, right? I understand that. But what you want to say, I think, as a Christian is, look, God tells me in his revelation, right, that unequal weights and measures are evil, right? That we're to act in a way that's just, right? And I know I must obey God. So, I mean, I have a foundation as a Christian, right, in God's word that directs me towards treating people fairly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you could talk about other issues, right? You can bring in philosophical type arguments too, if you want, right? Or if you're equipped to do that. But I think what you want to show is that in a Christian worldview, or what you get from scripture, or what you get from revelation or Christian tradition, right, equips you to recognize, right, that all human beings are made in the image of God, right? And they, that as being made in the image of God, they should be treated in a way that's equal and just, right? That doesn't mean
Egalitarian.
Yeah, it doesn't mean egalitarian, right? Because obviously we should treat people differently in some cases, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that once you start to really think about it, right?
Yeah.
But here's the baseline is that as made in the image of God, right, ordered to God as our ultimate end, right, we have to, as ordered to God, right, we have an obligation to allow others to pursue God, right? And to not deprive them of the opportunity to pursue God and to pursue those natural ends that God has ordained them to, right? They're subject to the natural law and the divine law just as we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all, are created equal and equal under God, right?
Right.
And that's our foundation, right? Now, what you want to say then is that, though, is really this: the whole point is not, you attacked Christianity on the basis of its immorality,
Mm-hmm.
right, and the basis of its being unequal, right, but as a matter or as abetting and fostering inequality, right?
Yeah.
But you have no justification for why inequality is wrong. So your attack on Christianity here fails.
Right.
And
And
that's a little more feisty, all right, I think, than the other issues, right? Because some people hold these things very dear to the heart, right?
Sure. And I think
be a little careful, or gentle. But I think what you want to say is, look, that criticism is not well founded,
right,
because it's not based on something that actually makes sense or has any philosophical foundation, rational foundation. That's what I would say.
Or even justification and experience, right? So should parents and kids have an equal say in what we have for dinner? Should the student and the teacher have an equal say in what grade they get? Like there's many different there's many different kinds of relationships that are discriminatory, right? If I'm waiting for the bus and a man for my children to go to school, and a man in a van drives up and says, I can give your kid a ride to school, I'm going to be discriminatory against that guy. Why? Sure. Because that's shady as all get out. Is that me being, I'm not taking him at his word. No, I'm discriminating, right? And I have good reason to discriminate in that case, because that because of the relationship that exists there, right? So, practically speaking, we discriminate all the time. Like I said, in that phrase, kind of the laboratory of life, right? We have to make discriminations. I choose this thing and not that thing. Right. I'm going to trust this person, or I'm not going to trust this person, right? That's not unfair. to that person.
Sure.
And we can go through, example after example. But again, I think, like you said, to get back to this point that they have to provide some sort of evidence.
That's right.
Of Christianity being this exploitative, sexist, racist, homophobic.
Well, what I really want to show is I think the most direct, right?
Yeah.
Is to say your presupposition, right? Your philosophical presupposition here is groundless.
Yeah.
Right. You have no foundation for that. Right. So,
it's not fair because it's not fair. It's not an argument.
That's right. Yeah, right? That's right. Yeah. It's right. Yeah. That is, at the end of the day, right, you don't have a foundation for the critique that you're bringing against Christianity. Therefore, it's not a rational critique. Right.
Yeah. That's it. That's something that I think the apologist has to think through. Because it gets to the heart of the matter.
I don't even want to grant them the premise, though, right?
Yeah.
That they're right about this whole moral situation. Anyways, I'll grant that there are some forms of discrimination and inequality that are wrong, right?
Yeah.
But that, to explain that, takes a whole different moral worldview. Their worldview is not capable. Their secularism, their humanism, their atheism, their agnosticism, their materialism is not capable of supporting a moral critique. Right. Of Christianity. And that's what you want to expose to them, right? Is that they're drowning, right?
Yeah.
They have no grounds to stand on, right? So if you're looking at all this, it's a little feisty, but I think, sometimes you got to go there and you can say it nicely, right? And try to say it with as much love and friendship as you can, right? And because we do, at the end of the day, we don't want to just win. Right. We want, the person to see the truth of Christianity. These are obstacles. These are proud arguments, right, that stand in the way of knowledge of God. And so we're going to tear them down. Right. And that's the way we need to see them. Right. Is these are obstacles to knowing God. Right. And they're brought as criticisms of our religion, of our faith. They're meant to tear us down. Right. They're thrown at us like fiery darts. Right. To kill our faith. And so we need to be ready to fight them. Right. Again, with love and charity, and as much, calmness as we can, but, knocking those down doesn't prove that Christianity is true.
Right.
And in this scenario, I don't even really want Christians to get overly concerned about proving things philosophically. This is defensive, right?
Yeah.
This is the destructive part, right? This is the combat part where we're just saying, look, you're attacking my faith. This is how I'm going to defeat these attacks, right?
Yeah.
That's my that's my strategy here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the Christian, when we think about evangelization and we hear words like, go to the peripheries, to the marginalized, the human mind is the peripheries where in some cases Christianity is not allowed.
That's right.
Right.
I agree.
And I think that's the place where the modern day apologist needs to go. Is to the human mind, because these things are not challenged regularly. These things are not challenged openly. Or even, for some people, I guarantee you, there hasn't been a challenge that they haven't shouted down, right? So if you're in this one-on-one situation with the person that is, especially in this final one we were talking about, right, to be able to have the time to challenge them seriously, but like you said, charitably, right? I think is very, very important. So, all right, Dr. Smith, I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about. And a lot to work on, I think, for Christians to be able to hopefully to work towards building up that the reasonableness and the truth of Christianity.
Right.
And a lot of that may be in challenging particular worldviews that are popular and sadly anti-Christian.
Right.
So I would invite all our listeners, check out all of our other podcasts, especially on Neo-Marxism and things like that. Over at CatholicStudiesAcademy.com. We're on YouTube and SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, God bless.